Hi, I'm Ollie. Welcome to Oxford Online English. In this lesson, you can learn about the IELTS Speaking exam Part 2. The IELTS Speaking test has 3 parts, and in this class you can learn in more detail about Part 2 of the speaking exam and how to improve your score. First, let's review what happens in Part 2 of the IELTS Speaking test. The examiner will give you a card with a topic. You have 1 minute to prepare a short speech on the topic. After 1 minute, the examiner will ask you to speak. You need to talk for between 1 and 2 minutes. After you finish, the examiner will ask 1 or 2 simple questions about what you said. Let's look at a sample question from Part 2 of the IELTS speaking test, which we can use today. Describe an important choice you made. You should say what choices you had, what you decided, and how easy it was to make your decision. You should also explain how you feel about this choice now. Imagine you're in the exam. You have 1 minute to prepare your answer. How should you use your time? Let's look Part 1, how to use your preparation time. The first thing you should do, ask the examiner if there are any words you don't understand. Asking the examiner will use some of your time, and that's not great, but don't talk if you haven't understood the question. That will be worse. Secondly, look at the question. It has 4 parts, the 3 bullet points and the longer question at the end. 1 minute is not a long time. You can't prepare everything, so don't try. Try to think of 1 or 2 things you can say for each part of the question. Make short notes to help you remember your points. How can you make effective notes? Let's look. For example, let's say you want to talk about choosing what to study at university. You write computer science or engineering, IT, interesting career opportunities, difficult, pros and cons on both sides, satisfied, IT work is interesting, creative. These notes will help you to speak. Let's see how. The 4 parts of the notes follow the 4 parts of the question. This will help you to keep your answer organized. You have some key words and phrases like career opportunities, pros and cons, or creative, which you can use in your answer. The notes give you at least 1 or 2 points to make about each part of the question. Again, you won't have time to do more than this, so don't try. Don't write full sentences. Focus on covering all the points you need to talk about. Okay, your minute's up, and it's time to talk. Now what? Part 2, how to organize your answer. Organizing your answer well is easy to do and important, but many students don't do it so well. So how can you organize your answer effectively? First, start with an opening phrase. Say something like, I'm going to tell you about, I'd like to talk about, I've decided to talk about, blah, blah, blah. This gives your speech a strong, clear start. What next? Very simple. Follow the bullet points. Say 1 to 2 sentences using your notes about each of the 3 bullet points. Hopefully, this will take you 30 to 60 seconds. Be focused and don't go off topic or add any points which don't answer the question. Every sentence should be a direct answer to one of the points on the card. Next, focus on the last part of the question. Here, explain how you feel about this choice now. This is the most important part of the question because it lets you go into more detail. This isn't just true for this question, this is generally true for IELTS Speaking Part 2 questions. The 3 bullet points are quite simple, and you can't say very much about them sometimes, but the last part always has more depth, and you should spend more time on it. So, try to make 3 to 4 sentences about the last part of the question. This should take you 30 to 60 seconds again. Great! You finished, right? Well, not quite. You also need a strong finish. Often, when I practice IELTS with my students, they act surprised when they finish their answers. Like this. And so I feel like I probably made the right choice. Finished. This does not sound like you've finished. It sounds like you've just run out of things to say. You should know when you've finished, and you should show the examiner clearly. So how can you finish strongly? Use a concluding phrase, such as, "That's why I feel that." Finally, when I look back at my decision now, I'm glad I made the decision I did. Obviously, the finishing phrases aren't like the opening phrases, which you can use for any topic. The finishing phrases will depend on the question you get. Just remember, you need to finish strongly. Don't just... Okay, I've finished point 2. What's next? Part 3, adding details to your answer. A lot of IELTS advice says the same things. Give detailed answers. Use varied vocabulary. Use different sentence structures. Okay, that's great. It's all true. But how? And how can you use this in part 2 of your IELTS speaking test? Actually, if you follow the advice I've given you so far, this will happen automatically. If you make 2 sentences for each bullet point, make 3 to 4 sentences for the last part of the question. Write down key vocabulary to use in your notes. If you do these things, your answer should already be detailed with some good vocabulary. We've already done a lot of the work you need to do here. But what else can you do? Well, for each point, try to give at least one fact and one opinion. For example, don't say, "I had to choose between studying computer science and studying engineering." Say, "I had to choose between studying computer science and studying engineering. I was interested in both, although I always felt that studying computer science was a better choice." Don't say, "I decided to study computer science." Instead, say, "I decided to study computer science because I felt it would give me more interesting career opportunities." This is a good, simple rule to make your answers more detailed. Always include a fact and an opinion if you can. Also, add details wherever you can. So don't say, "It was quite a difficult decision to make." Instead, say, "It was quite a difficult decision to make because my parents and my teachers all gave me different advice and I didn't know what to do." Don't say, "I feel like I made the right decision." Say, "I feel like I made the right decision because I really enjoy working in IT. It's very creative and there's always something new to learn." Following these simple rules will make your answers more detailed and give you a higher chance to get a better score. Next, let's look at timing. Part 4. How long should you speak? This is simple. At least 1 minute. Speaking for less than 1 minute will hurt your score. You can speak for up to 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, the examiner will stop you even if you're in the middle of your sentence. If the examiner stops you, that's not necessarily a problem. It doesn't affect your score if you go too long. However, if you haven't covered all the parts of the question, that could be a problem. That's why a good goal is to speak for 90 seconds. This should give you enough time to say everything you want to say. So, how do you do that? Practice and time yourself. Type IELTS Speaking Part 2 questions into Google. Find some questions to practice with. First, speak and look at your timer on your phone or wherever. Answer the same question several times. Your goal is to cover all parts of the question in 90 seconds. Later, when you're more comfortable with this, practice your answers but don't look at the timer. At the end, guess how long you spoke for and then look at the timer to check. If you do this a few times, you'll start to feel how long you need to speak for. You'll also know how much you can say. Different people speak at different speeds. If you can speak fast and fluently, you'll be able to say more in 90 seconds. If you're a slower speaker, you won't be able to say as much. Practicing will help you to understand how much you can say in 90 seconds. Part 5. Dealing with common problems. Finally, let's look at some problems which many students face in Part 2 of the IELTS speaking test. First problem. I don't have anything to say about this topic. Well, I chose the question for this lesson because it's an easier one. Describe an important choice you made, I think, is something which most people could talk about. Unfortunately, not all of the questions are so easy or general. For example, if the question is, talk about a party which you went to. What if you haven't been to a party for several years? What if you don't like parties? This could happen. We hope it won't, but it could. What can you do? First, when you're preparing for the exam, be strict with yourself. Don't just practice easy questions or questions which you think are interesting. Find the most difficult question you can. Find the most boring question you can. Practice answering these. Find more difficult questions. Find more boring questions and practice them. You need to be prepared for anything. If the worst happens and you get a topic where you don't have anything to say, you have two options. First, you can just lie. The examiner really doesn't care if you tell the truth or not. Make up a story if you can. Otherwise, try to think of a story from a friend or from the news or anything which you could use. For example, if the topic is talk about a party which you went to, and your friend told you about a party that he or she went to last week, use your friend's story. To be clear, don't talk about your friend. Use your friend's story and make it about you. This is important. In other parts of the IELTS exam, it can be okay to say, I don't know, or I don't have anything to say about this. But in Part 2, you must answer the question. You can't change the topic or adapt it. Okay, what other common problems do IELTS students have during Part 2 of the speaking test? Another common problem, I'm so nervous. Alright, well, giving a speech like this makes a lot of people nervous or uncomfortable. What can you do about this? First of all, understand that feeling nervous in this situation is natural. Very few people can feel totally comfortable in this kind of situation. Is there anything you can do to feel less nervous? Well, yes, there is. First, practice making presentations or speeches in English in front of as many people as possible, maybe in class or with your teacher. Practicing speaking like this is useful anyway, but it's also good to get used to feeling nervous. Feeling a little bit nervous doesn't mean your English will get worse. Feeling nervous is natural. You can feel nervous and you can still speak well. It's important to understand this before your exam. Okay, Part 6. Let's review what we've talked about today. To get a higher score in Part 2 of the IELTS speaking test, you need to prepare carefully, making sure you have something to say for each part of the question. You should structure your speech with a clear beginning and ending. Add details to your answer where possible, especially for the last part of the question. Try to speak for around 90 seconds and practice in advance, including boring questions, difficult questions, and speaking in situations where you feel nervous. Okay, think about the question we looked at today. Here it is again. What would you talk about? What would you say? What details could you add to your answer? Try it for yourself and try to use some of the things we've talked about today. Alright, that's the end of the lesson. Thanks very much for watching. I really hope you found this IELTS advice useful in preparing for your exam. Good luck if you have an exam coming up soon. You can see more of our free lessons on our website, oxfordonlineenglish.com, but that's all for today. See you next time.